My mother rolled her eyes when I walked into the courtroom, convinced I was about to be humiliated. She and my father had sued me for millions, claiming I manipulated my grandfather into leaving me his fortune. But when the judge looked at me, he did not see the helpless daughter my parents described. He froze. "Wait, the charges are against you, Miss Sterling," he asked, his voice trembling slightly. My parents exchanged confused glances. They had no idea that the woman they called a failure was actually the legal strategist who wrote the very laws they were trying to use against me. Before I tell you how I walked out of that courtroom with everything while they lost it all, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to hide your success, just to survive your toxic family. I am Isis Sterling, 32 years old, and to my family I am a ghost, a mistake, someone to be hidden away. But as I stepped out of my economy Uber in front of the district court, the gray clouds overhead seemed to match the storm brewing inside me. I adjusted the collar of my thrift store blazer. It was purposeful. I had plenty of designer suits hanging in my climate-controlled closet in my penthouse downtown, but today I needed to play the part. I needed them to underestimate me one last time. Just as I closed the car door, a glossy black Range Rover screeched to a halt right beside me. It was so close the side mirror nearly clipped my arm. I did not flinch. I knew exactly who it was. The window rolled down, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with the damp air. My brother Tyson stepped out first, looking sharp in a suit that I knew cost more than his car payment. Then came my parents, Lawrence and Patricia, attempting to look like grieving royalty. And finally Courtney, my sister-in-law. Courtney stepped out of the back seat, her heels clicking loudly on the pavement. She saw me standing there near a large puddle of dirty rainwater that had gathered in the gutter. She did not walk around me. She did not ask me to move. Instead, she stomped her foot down hard, right into the center of the puddle. Dark brown sludge exploded upward, splashing all over the left side of my trousers and soaking into the fabric of my shoes. The cold water seeped through to my skin instantly. "Oops," Courtney said, but her voice held zero apology. She covered her mouth with a manicured hand, feigning shock. "Sorry, Isis, I did not see you standing there. You blend into the background so easily. But honestly, that suit is so cheap a little mud might actually improve the texture. Besides, where you are going, you will be wearing an orange jumpsuit soon enough, so it does not really matter, does it?" My mother Patricia walked up behind her. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not offer a tissue. She looked at my stained clothes with a familiar expression of disgust, the same look she used to give me when I brought home report cards with straight A's instead of becoming a cheerleader like she wanted. "Look at you." My mother sighed, shaking her head. "You are a mess, Isis. Just do us all a favor and plead guilty. Don't drag this out. Don't make us testify about how you took advantage of your grandfather's dementia. We are willing to be lenient if you just sign the assets over to Tyson and Courtney today. We might even give you enough money to buy a bus ticket out of town." I stood there feeling the cold mud dry on my leg. I looked at Courtney, who was smirking at her husband, expecting him to laugh. Tyson chuckled nervously, checking his phone. I looked at my father, who was busy adjusting his tie, refusing to make eye contact with me. They thought I was silent because I was defeated. They thought I was taking the insult because I had no power. They were wrong. I was silent because I was checking the license plate of the Range Rover they arrived in. I had memorized the fleet numbers of every rental agency in the city. "Take a good look at that car, Courtney," I thought to myself. "Enjoy the leather seats and the heated steering wheel. Because according to the rental agreement I accessed this morning, that vehicle is due back to Hertz in exactly 15 minutes. You put down the deposit with a credit card that is already over its limit." I didn't say a word. I just reached into my bag, pulled out a packet of tissues, and wiped the worst of the mud from my shoe. "See you inside," I said calmly. My voice was steady. It unnerved them. They expected tears. They expected begging. Courtney scoffed and linked arms with my mother. "Let us go, Patricia," she said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "We do not want to be seen with the help." As they walked up the marble steps of the courthouse laughing and taking selfies, I felt a sense of déjà vu. The cold dampness on my leg took me back immediately to last week. To the day everything finally broke. To the funeral. 7 days ago, the air was just as cold. The heavy oak doors of the First Baptist Church were thrown open, and the sound of the organ spilled out into the street. It was the funeral of Cyrus Sterling, my grandfather, a titan of real estate, a man who built an empire from nothing. To the world, he was a businessman. To me, he was the only person in this family who ever remembered my birthday. I had arrived early, wanting to have a moment of peace with him before the circus arrived. I walked down the center aisle towards the front. The first pew was draped in velvet, reserved for immediate family. My name Isis was printed on a small card placed on the seat right next to where my father would sit. Grandfather had requested it explicitly in his funeral instructions. I sat down staring at the closed casket, fighting back tears. I missed him. I missed his gravelly voice telling me that I was the smartest shark in the ocean even if I swam in silence. Suddenly I felt a sharp grip on my upper arm. It was not a comforting touch, it was a claw. I looked up to see my mother Patricia looming over me. Her black hat was enormous, covering half her face, but I could see the fury in her eyes. "Get up," she hissed. "Excuse me?" I whispered, confused. I said, "Get up, Isis." My mother repeated louder this time. "This row is for the grieving family. This is for the legacy. People are going to be taking photos today. The mayor is coming. We need to present a united, successful front. I am family." I said, my voice trembling. "I am his granddaughter." "You are a distraction," she snapped. "Look at you, no makeup, hair in a simple bun, wearing a dress that looks like a sack. You do not fit the image, Isis. Courtney and Tyson need to sit here. They are the future of the Sterling name. You are just here." She physically pulled me up from the seat. She crumbled the name card that said Isis Sterling and shoved it into her purse. "Go to the back," she ordered, pointing a gloved finger toward the heavy entrance doors. "Stand by the guest book, hand out the programs, make yourself useful for once, and try not to let anyone see you crying. It looks weak." I looked at my father, hoping he would intervene, hoping he would say, "Patricia, stop, she is our daughter." But Lawrence Sterling just looked through me as if I were made of glass. "Listen to your mother, Isis," he muttered. "Courtney needs the seat. She is grieving very hard." Courtney, who had met my grandfather exactly 3 times in her life, was currently checking her makeup in a compact mirror, waiting for me to move. "Fine," I said softly. I walked all the way to the back of the church. I stood in the drafty vestibule holding a stack of glossy programs that featured a photo of my grandfather, a photo I had taken of him laughing at a barbecue 3 years ago. From the back I watched them. I watched my parents accept condolences from the city council members, acting as if they were heartbroken. I watched Tyson and Courtney sit in the front row holding hands, pretending to wipe away tears whenever a camera flashed. They looked perfect. They looked like the grieving heirs to a fortune. But they did not know who was watching. Standing in the shadows near a marble pillar was a tall, elderly man in a gray suit. He wasn't crying. He wasn't taking photos. He was watching my mother forcefully remove me from the front row. He watched me stand by the door with my head held high, doing my duty despite the humiliation. He shook his head slowly, pulled a small leather notebook from his pocket, and wrote something down. That man was Judge Halloway, the executor of my grandfather's estate, and he was the man who would be presiding over the courtroom today. My family thought they had put me in my place at the back of the church. They didn't realize that by sending me to the back, they had given the most powerful witness in the room a front row seat to their cruelty. Back in the present, the courtroom doors opened. My mother turned back to look at me one last time, her eyes rolling in that familiar way. "Ready to lose everything, darling," she sneered. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled all day. "Yes, Mother," I said. "I am ready for everyone to get exactly what they deserve." I walked through the metal detectors, the mud on my shoe drying into a crust. The bailiff nodded at me. I walked past the gallery where my parents were high-fiving their expensive lawyer. I walked past the defense table. And I kept walking. "Hey, you cannot go back there," the lawyer barked. "The defendant sits here." I ignored him. I walked straight to the stack of files sitting on the prosecution's desk. The files that contained the countersuit I had filed this morning under a sealed motion. My mother laughed. Oh God, she is confused. She thinks she is the lawyer. Someone help her before she embarrasses us further. Then the gavel banged. All rise. Judge Holloway entered. He looked tired. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the docket. Then he looked at the defense table where my parents sat smug and confident. Then he looked at the empty defendant's chair. Finally, his eyes drifted to where I was standing. He stopped. He took off his glasses. He wiped them and put them back on. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. My mother stood up. "Yes, Your Honor, we are here. We apologize for our daughter. She is a bit unstable. She seems to be wandering around the courtroom." The judge ignored her. He was looking only at me. "Isis," he said, using my first name with a tone of respect that made my father sit up straight. "I did not expect to see you here. I thought you were in Washington advising on the Amazon merger." I smoothed my cheap blazer. "I took a personal day, Your Honor," I replied, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "I had some family business to attend to." The judge looked at the lawsuit in front of him. Then he looked at my parents, whose smiles were starting to falter. "Wait," he said, flipping the page. "These people, they are suing you. They are suing the author of the Modern Inheritance Act for not understanding a will." My mother froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Courtney dropped her designer purse on the floor. I turned to face them. The roll of the eyes was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that they had walked into a lion's den thinking they were hunting a mouse. "Let's begin," I said. The mahogany conference table in the law offices of Holloway and Associates was long enough to land a small plane on. It was polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the ornate crystal chandelier hanging above. My family sat around it like vultures waiting for a carcass to be served on a silver platter. I sat in the far corner on a folding chair that I had pulled out from against the wall because nobody had bothered to leave a seat for me at the main table. From my vantage point, I watched them. They looked like a picture from a magazine titled Delusion. My mother, Patricia, was adjusting the enormous diamond brooch on her lapel, a piece of jewelry I knew for a fact was a high-quality replica because she had pawned the real one 3 months ago to pay the country club dues. My father, Lawrence, was leaning back in the plush leather executive chair, looking at the ceiling with a smug expression, as if he had already spent the money he did not yet have. And then there were the lovebirds. My brother, Tyson, and his wife, Courtney. Tyson was scrolling through his iPad, showing Courtney photos of yachts. His voice was too loud for the solemn environment echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "Look at this one, babe," he said, tapping the screen aggressively. "The Sunseeker, 116. It has a jacuzzi on the flybridge and 5 staterooms. We could dock it in Miami for the winter and bring it up to the vineyard for the summer. What do you think?" Courtney wrinkled her nose, pushing a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear. She glanced at the price tag listed on the screen. 12 million. "That is decent," she said with a shrug that made my blood boil. "But Tyson, do we really want something used? I mean, think about who might have slept in those staterooms." "Gross. Maybe we should commission a custom build. Once the money hits the account, we can put down a deposit for something Italian. Maybe a Benetti." Tyson nodded vigorously, as if she had just solved a complex physics equation. "You are right, babe. Custom is better. We deserve custom. Grandfather would have wanted us to have the best right." I almost laughed out loud. Grandfather drove a 10-year-old Ford truck until the day he died. He hated boats. He called them holes in the water you throw money into. But I stayed silent, digging my fingernails into my palms. My father chimed in, his voice dripping with arrogance. Don't forget the Hamptons property, Tyson. Your mother and I have already spoken to a realtor about that estate on Meadow Lane, the one with the 9-car garage. We need a place big enough to host the senator next month. It is important for the family image. Of course, Dad, Tyson replied. We will buy the whole block if we have to. The Sterling name is about to own the East Coast. They carried on like this for 20 minutes, spending millions of imaginary dollars, designing imaginary lives. They did not mention my grandfather once. Not a single memory. Not a single word of sadness about the man who had built the empire they were so eager to cannibalize. Suddenly, my mother turned in her chair. She snapped her fingers. The sound was sharp like a whip crack in the room. Isis, she called out, not even looking at me directly. Yes, Mother, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. My throat is parched, she said, waving her hand toward the sideboard, where a silver pitcher of water and a coffee service had been set up. Pour me a glass of water, sparkling, no ice, and make your father a coffee. Black. 2 sugars. Hurry up. We don't have all day. I paused. There was a paralegal standing right outside the door who would have happily served them. But this wasn't about thirst. This was about hierarchy. This was about reminding me that in their world, I was the help. I stood up slowly. The folding chair scraped against the floor and Courtney giggled. Careful, Isis, she sneered. Don't scratch the floor. You can't afford to fix it. I walked over to the sideboard. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the effort it took not to throw the pitcher of water across the room. I poured the sparkling water. I listened to the fizz of the bubbles. I poured the coffee. I counted the sugar cubes. 1, 2. I walked around the table, placing the water in front of my mother and the coffee in front of my father. They did not say thank you. They did not even pause their conversation about beachfront property taxes. I was invisible. A ghost in a cheap suit serving the kings and queens of nothing. While you are up, Isis, Tyson said without looking away from his iPad. Throw this wrapper away for me. He tossed a granola bar wrapper onto the table in front of me. I stared at the wrapper. Then I stared at him. For a second, the air in the room grew heavy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that the Hamptons estate was already sold last week. I wanted to tell them that the bank was preparing to repossess Tyson's current car tomorrow morning. I wanted to tell them that I was the one paying the lease on the very office we were sitting in. But I didn't. I picked up the wrapper. Sure, Tyson, I said softly. I walked back to my corner and sat down just as the heavy double doors opened. Mr. Halloway entered the room. He was a man of small stature but immense presence. He carried a thick leather portfolio under his arm. He did not smile. He walked to the head of the table and sat down. He placed the portfolio on the mahogany surface and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. My father sat up straighter, buttoning his jacket. Mr. Halloway, good to see you. Let's get this formality over with. We have a realtor waiting for us at 2. Mr. Halloway looked at my father over the rim of his glasses. His expression was unreadable. He did not open the portfolio immediately. Instead, he looked around the room. His eyes lingered on Tyson, then on Courtney, then on my mother. Finally, his gaze landed on me in the corner. Ms. Sterling, he said, nodding to me. Would you like a chair at the table? Oh, she is fine back there, Mr. Halloway, my mother interrupted quickly, laughing nervously. Isis prefers the background. She gets anxious in the spotlight. Please proceed. Mr. Halloway pursed his lips. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he caught my eye. I gave a microscopic shake of my head. Let them dig their grave, I thought. Very well, Mr. Halloway said. He reached for the portfolio. The sound of the leather sliding across the wood was the only sound in the room. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a letter opener. With a swift, precise movement, he sliced open the red wax seal on the heavy cream envelope. My family leaned forward. The greed in their eyes was so potent, it was almost palpable. Tyson stopped chewing his gum. Courtney held her breath, gripping her designer bag. My father was practically vibrating. Mr. Halloway unfolded the document. He smoothed it out on the table. He took a sip of water. He began to read. I, Cyrus Benjamin Sterling, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. He paused. The total value of the Sterling estate, including all real estate holdings, liquid assets, offshore accounts, and intellectual property, has been audited and verified as of this morning. My mother grabbed my father's hand. Courtney looked at Tyson with wide, hungry eyes. The value, Mr. Halloway continued, his voice steady and calm, is $320 million. $320 million. The number hung in the air. A gasp went around the table. My mother let out a small sob of joy. Tyson pumped his fist in the air, whispering, "Yes, yes, yes." Courtney looked like she was about to faint from ecstasy. They were already spending it. They were already living in the mansion. They were already laughing at the world from the deck of their yacht. They did not hear the next breath Mr. Halloway took. They did not see the way his eyes shifted to me one last time, filled with a mix of sorrow and justice. They were too blinded by the light of the gold to see the cliff they were standing on. Mr. Halloway cleared his throat loudly, cutting through their celebration. "And the distribution of said assets is as follows," he read. The room went silent again. The drop was coming, and I was the only one wearing a parachute. Mr. Halloway did not look up from the document. He let the figure of $320 million hang in the air for a moment longer. It was a beautiful number, a number that could change lives, a number that my family believed belonged to them by divine right. He cleared his throat and continued reading. "To my son Lawrence and his wife Patricia." My parents straightened up. My mother Patricia smoothed her skirt, ready to accept her fortune. My father Lawrence practically licked his lips. Mr. Halloway read in a monotone voice. "I leave my collection of vintage postage stamps stored in the attic of the old estate. I hope this hobby provides you with the patience you lacked while raising your children." The room went deadly silent. My father blinked. He leaned forward, his face contorted in confusion. "Excuse me," Lawrence stammered. "Did you say stamps, like for mailing letters?" Mr. Halloway nodded once. "Correct. The estimated value is approximately $500. My mother let out a strangled noise like a dying cat. $500. Are you insane? We are talking about a multi-million-dollar estate. Skip to the real assets, Halloway. Stop playing games." Mr. Halloway ignored her. He looked at my brother. "To my grandson Tyson." Tyson grinned, rubbing his hands together. "Finally. Here comes the yacht." He looked at Courtney and winked. "I leave my lucky 1998 penny which I found on the sidewalk the day you were born." Mr. Halloway reached into his pocket and pulled out a small Ziploc bag containing a single dirty copper coin. He slid it across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right in front of Tyson. "I hope this penny brings you the luck you will need, since you have never learned the value of hard work." Mr. Halloway finished reading. Tyson stared at the penny. His face turned a deep, violent shade of red. The veins in his neck began to bulge. "Is this a joke?" Tyson whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "A penny, a literal penny." Mr. Halloway looked over his glasses. "It is not a joke, it is a bequest." And finally Mr. Halloway said, turning the page, "To my granddaughter, Isis Sterling." My family froze. Their heads snapped toward me. Their eyes were wide with shock and fear. To Isis, who was the only one to sit by my bedside when the cancer took my breath. To Isis, who never asked me for a dime. To Isis, who understood that legacy is built, not bought. Mr. Halloway looked me dead in the eye and smiled a genuine warm smile. "I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes the entirety of the Sterling Real Estate Group, all liquid cash assets, the securities portfolio, and all physical properties, including the Hamptons estate, the Manhattan penthouse, and the building we are currently sitting in. Total value approximately $320 million. For 3 seconds there was absolute silence. It was the silence of a bomb that had landed but had not yet detonated. Then the world exploded. No, my mother screamed. It was a primal, animalistic sound. She moved faster than I had ever seen her move in my life. She launched herself out of her chair, knocking it backward onto the floor. She lunged across the corner of the table. Before I could react, her hand connected with my face. The sound of the slap echoed through the room like a gunshot. It was sharp and stinging. My head whipped to the side. I tasted the metallic tang of blood where my tooth had cut into my inner lip. "You little witch!" my mother shrieked, grabbing my blazer with both hands and shaking me. "What did you do to him? What did you do? You poisoned his mind. You forced him to sign this. You are a thief. A dirty, ungrateful thief." Mr. Halloway was on his feet shouting, "Mrs. Sterling, unhand her immediately, or I will call security." But the chaos had just begun. Tyson slammed his fist onto the table so hard the water pitcher rattled. "She drugged him," Tyson yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I read about this. She gave him too much morphine so he would not know what he was signing. That is the only explanation. Grandfather hated her. Everyone hated her." Courtney stood up, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. The sophisticated socialite facade was gone completely, replaced by something ugly and raw. "You cannot do this," Courtney screamed at me, her voice shrill and piercing. "That money belongs to Tyson. That money belongs to my children. You are nothing, Isis. You are a servant. You are a low-class nobody who fetched coffee 5 minutes ago. How dare you steal from my husband?" I sat there enduring the assault. My cheek was burning. My lip was bleeding. My mother was still gripping my lapels, her nails digging into my skin. But inside, I was ice cold. I reached up and firmly removed my mother's hands from my jacket. I pushed her back, not violently, but with enough force to make her stumble. "Sit down, Patricia," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the screaming like a knife. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls, looking at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. I had never called her by her first name before. "You are going to jail!" Tyson shouted, pacing the room like a caged animal. "I am going to sue you for everything. I am going to make sure you rot in a cell for elder abuse. You manipulated a dying old man. You are a predator, Isis, a sick, twisted predator." Courtney walked around the table and stood right in front of me. She leaned down, her expensive perfume suffocating me. "Listen to me, you little scammer," she hissed, spit flying from her mouth. "You are going to sign a document right now transferring everything to Tyson. If you do not, I will destroy you. I will tell everyone what you really are. A fraud, a nobody, a charity case we kept around out of pity." She poked me hard in the chest with her manicured finger. "Fix this, now, or you will regret the day you were born." I looked at Courtney. Then I looked at Tyson, still red-faced and panting. Then I looked at my mother, who was leaning against the wall, sobbing dramatically about how her life was ruined. I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out a white handkerchief. I dabbed the corner of my mouth, checking the blood. It was bright red against the white fabric. I looked at the blood for a moment. Then I looked up at them. "Are you finished?" I asked calmly. Tyson looked like he was about to stroke out. "Finished. We are just getting started." "This will is invalid. It is a fraud." I stood up. I smoothed my cheap blazer. I picked up the glass of water I had poured for myself earlier and took a slow, deliberate sip. "Mr. Halloway," I said, turning to the lawyer, "please note for the record that Patricia Sterling just assaulted the primary beneficiary of the estate." "I noted it, Ms. Sterling," Mr. Halloway said, his voice grim. "The security camera in the corner recorded it as well." I turned back to my family. "You can sue me," I said. "You can scream, you can cry, you can call me every name in the book. But there is one thing you seem to have forgotten in your hysteria." I took a step toward Courtney, forcing her to step back. "You called me a servant. You called me a nobody. But take a look around you. Look at the walls. Look at the floor. Look at the door you walked in through." I gestured to the room with a sweeping motion of my hand. I am not just the beneficiary, I am the landlord. My mother stopped crying. Tyson stopped pacing. What are you talking about? My father whispered, speaking for the first time, his face pale as a sheet. I smiled, and this time the smile did not reach my eyes. The building we are standing in, I said, my voice steady and lethal. It was part of the commercial portfolio. As of 5 minutes ago, I own this law firm's building. I own the parking garage your rental car is parked in. I own the mortgage on the house you are currently sleeping in because grandfather bought that debt from the bank 6 months ago to stop you from being foreclosed on. I leaned in close to my mother, my face inches from hers. So, mother, before you raise your hand to slap me again, I suggest you think very carefully, because you are not standing on neutral ground, you are standing in my office. And I have a very strict policy against trespassing. I turned to Mr. Halloway. Please have security escort these people out, and Mr. Halloway send them the bill for the chair my mother knocked over. I want it replaced. The drop in the room was absolute. The power had shifted, and for the first time in their lives, they were looking at me and seeing the one thing they feared most. The boss. The process server pounded on the door of my apartment at 6 in the morning. He did not knock. He hammered his fist against the wood like he was trying to break it down. I wrapped my silk robe tighter around myself and opened the door just a crack. A heavy man with a bored expression shoved a thick stack of papers into my chest. "You have been served," he grunted and walked away without looking back. I closed the door and locked it. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of what I held. I walked to my kitchen island and dropped the stack onto the marble counter with a heavy thud. The cover page stared up at me in bold black letters. Superior Court of Fulton County. Plaintiffs Lawrence and Patricia Sterling. Defendant Isis Sterling. I flipped the page and read the charges. Count 1, undue influence. Count 2, fraud. Count 3, elder abuse. I stopped reading. Elder abuse. The words felt like a physical blow. I was the one who moved into grandfather's guest room when his legs started to fail. I was the one who learned how to administer his medication because my mother said needles made her queasy. I was the one who sat up with him through the nights when the pain was so bad he could not sleep, reading him his favorite mystery novels until he finally drifted off. And now the people who had visited him a total of 4 times in 2 years were accusing me of abusing him. My phone buzzed on the counter. Then it buzzed again, and again. Within seconds, it was vibrating continuously, dancing across the marble surface like a possessed object. I picked it up. My notifications were exploding. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, hundreds of tags, thousands of comments. I opened Instagram and saw why. At the top of my feed was a live video from Courtney. She was sitting in what looked like her living room, but I knew she had set up a ring light to make her tears glisten perfectly for the camera. She was wearing no makeup, which was a calculated move to look vulnerable. "Hey guys," she whispered into the camera, wiping away a fake tear. "I did not want to come on here today. I usually keep my family life private, but I cannot stay silent anymore. We are living through a nightmare." I watched in horror as the viewer count climbed. 5,000, 10,000, 15,000. "My husband's grandfather passed away last week," she continued, her voice breaking theatrically. "We loved him so much. But we found out today that he was being controlled." She paused to let the chat fill with sympathetic emojis. "His caretaker," she said, refusing to use my name. "She isolated him. She changed the locks. We tried to visit. We brought food. We brought gifts. But she would not let us in. She told us he was sleeping or that he did not want to see us. We found out later that she was starving him to make him weak so he would sign over his assets to her." "Liar," I whispered to the empty room. The comments rolled in faster than I could read them. "What a monster. I hope she rots in jail. Post her picture, let's find her. Justice for Grandpa." Courtney leaned closer to the camera. "We are taking legal action," she said. "But the legal system is slow. We just want justice. We want to make sure she cannot hurt anyone else. If you see Isis Sterling, please tell her to do the right thing. Tell her to stop stealing from a grieving family." She ended the video. My stomach turned. She had weaponized her following. She had turned the court of public opinion against me before I even had a chance to speak. I opened my direct messages. They were filled with venom. Strangers telling me I should die. People from high school I hadn't spoken to in 10 years asking if it was true. Even a few of my colleagues from the legal association had sent tentative messages asking what was going on. My mother had shared Courtney's video with the caption, "A mother's heart breaks when she realizes she raised a monster. Pray for us." I felt a wave of nausea. This was their strategy. They knew they had no evidence. They knew the medical records would prove grandfather was well fed and cared for. They knew the security logs would show they never tried to visit. But they didn't care about the truth. They wanted to break me. They wanted to humiliate me so badly that I would settle just to make it stop. They wanted me to panic. They wanted me to call them begging for mercy. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from Tyson. I opened it. It was a picture of the lawsuit cover page followed by a message. "Game over, sis. The whole city hates you. We have witnesses lined up who will say whatever we want. Courtney knows people at the local news station. By tomorrow, your face will be on every TV screen in Atlanta labeled as an abuser. Give us the money, sign the settlement, or we will make sure you never walk down the street safely again." I stared at the message. I stared at the threat. For a moment, I felt small. I felt like the little girl who was made to eat in the kitchen while the adults ate in the dining room. I felt the weight of their combined hatred pressing down on me. But then I looked over at the bookshelf in my living room, at the framed photo of me and grandfather fishing on the lake. He was laughing, his head thrown back, his eyes crinkled with joy. He had told me once, "Isis, they will try to bury you because they fear your light. When they do, remember that you are a seed, not a corpse." I took a deep breath. The nausea faded. The shaking in my hands stopped. They had made a critical error. They assumed I was reacting emotionally. They assumed I cared what strangers thought of me. They assumed I was playing by the rules of a family spat. But I wasn't. I was playing a game of high-stakes chess, and they had just moved their queen into a trap. Courtney's video was defamation per se. My mother's post was libel. Tyson's text message was extortion. I picked up the thick stack of legal papers. I walked over to the corner of my office where my heavy-duty industrial shredder sat. I did not shred the lawsuit. I needed that. Instead, I printed out a screenshot of Tyson's text message. I printed out a transcript of Courtney's video. Then I took the letter my brother had sent me last week, the one where he offered to let me live in the guest house if I helped him commit tax fraud on the estate. I fed Tyson's threat into the shredder. The machine roared to life, its metal teeth tearing the paper into confetti. I watched the strips of paper fall into the bin. I smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile. "You want a villain?" I said to the empty room. "Fine. I will be the villain." I walked back to my computer. I opened a secure folder named Operation Payback. I dragged the recording of Courtney's video into it. Then I opened my email and drafted a message to my private investigator. Subject: green light. Message: they have escalated. Release the Las Vegas surveillance footage. And send the unredacted bank statements to the district attorney. I hit send. Let them have their internet fame for today. Let them enjoy the likes and the sympathy. Because tomorrow they were going to learn the difference between a social media influencer and a legal executioner. I went to my closet and pulled out my suit for court. It was navy blue, sharp, professional, armor. "I am not the victim here," I whispered. "I am the karma you never saw coming." The champagne flowed like water through the grand ballroom of my grandfather's estate. It was ironic because the people drinking it could not afford a bottle of water, let alone the cases of Dom Perignon stacking up in the recycling bin. My parents, Lawrence and Patricia, had decided that the best way to win a lawsuit was to pretend they had already won. They threw a victory gala before the judge had even banged his gavel. They called it a celebration of life for Cyrus Sterling, but everyone in the room knew what it really was. It was a networking event for my family to show off money they did not have to people who did not care about them. The house looked exactly as my grandfather had left it, but the atmosphere was twisted. The warm smell of his pipe tobacco and old books was replaced by the overpowering scent of expensive floral arrangements. Lilies. Thousands of white lilies. My mother had ordered them this morning, charging the $20,000 bill to the estate account she assumed she would have access to by next week. I was not there in person. I would not step foot in that snake pit, but I was there in spirit, or rather, in digital frequency. 3 miles away, parked in a nondescript black van on a side street, I adjusted the volume on my headphones. The audio feed was crystal clear. I had installed the listening devices in the crown molding of the ballroom 3 years ago, when grandfather was worried about his nursing staff stealing silver. He never caught a nurse, but tonight I was catching my entire family. I listened as my mother Patricia worked the room. I could hear the clinking of her jewelry and the fake high-pitched laugh she used when she was trying to impress the mayor's wife. Oh yes, it has been so difficult. Patricia sighed, her voice dripping with performative grief. But we are holding up. We are strong. Lawrence is planning to expand the business internationally next year. We are thinking Dubai or perhaps Singapore. I let out a dry laugh in the empty van. Dubai. My father could not even navigate a spreadsheet, let alone an international expansion. The audio shifted as the microphone picked up Courtney's voice near the fireplace. She was speaking to a group of her country club friends. "We are going to gut this entire room," she announced loudly. "It is so dark and depressing, isn't it? All this dark wood, it feels like a museum. We are going to knock down that wall, open up the space, and paint everything white. Minimalist, modern, and that library has to go. Who reads books anymore anyway? We are going to turn it into a wine cellar and tasting room." My hand tightened around the pen I was holding. That library was my grandfather's soul. It was where he taught me to read. It was where he taught me about contracts and interest rates, and she wanted to turn it into a drinking den for her vapid friends. But the real knife to the heart came 10 minutes later. The ambient noise of the party settled down as a heavy silence fell over the room. Through the feed I heard the distinct heavy footsteps of a man with a cane. I knew immediately who it was. Arthur Vance, my grandfather's oldest business partner and one of the few men in Atlanta who had actual integrity. Lawrence Arthur's deep voice boomed. "I have been looking around for an hour. Where is Isis?" The chatter in the room stopped. I leaned forward in my chair, pressing the headphones tighter to my ears. My father cleared his throat. I could practically see him adjusting his tie, trying to look composed. "Ah, Mr. Vance," my father said smoothly. "It is good to see you. Please have a drink." "I did not come here for a drink, Lawrence," Mr. Vance replied. "I came to pay respects to my friend, and I expected to see his granddaughter here. Isis was the only one who knew how Cyrus ran things. She should be standing here receiving these guests, not you. Where is she?" There was a pause, a dangerous pause. My father had to make a choice. He could tell the truth that they were suing me, and I was currently destroying them in court. Or he could lie. Lawrence Sterling never chose the truth. "It is a difficult situation, Arthur," my father said, lowering his voice to a theatrical whisper that was designed to be heard by everyone nearby. "We did not want to make a public announcement, but since you asked, Isis is not well." "What do you mean, not well?" Mr. Vance asked. "She has been struggling for years," Lawrence lied. "Mental health issues and substance abuse. We tried to keep it private to protect her dignity. But after Cyrus died, she spiraled. She became violent, paranoid. She started making wild accusations claiming the will was fake, attacking her mother. A collective gasp went through the room. We had no choice but to intervene. My mother. Patricia chimed in, her voice trembling perfectly. We sent her to a facility in Arizona, a very exclusive rehabilitation center. We are paying for everything, of course. We just want our little girl to get clean. That is why she is not here tonight. She is in detox. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the console in front of me. The recording light was blinking steady and red. Is that so? Mr. Vance asked slowly. I spoke to Isis last week. She seemed perfectly fine to me, sharp as a tack. That is the thing about addicts, Arthur, my father said quickly. They are master manipulators. They can hide it so well. But we found the pills in her apartment. We found the empty bottles. It broke my heart, Arthur. It truly did. That is why we are contesting the will, you know. We cannot let a drug addict control the Sterling empire. She would sell it all for her next fix in a week. We are doing this to save her from herself. The crowd murmured in agreement. Poor Lawrence. Poor Patricia. Such good parents, dealing with a junkie daughter while grieving their father. They are saints. I slowly took off the headphones. The silence in the van was sudden and heavy. They had not just stolen my money. They were stealing my reputation. They were painting me as unstable and dangerous to ensure that even if I won the money, no one in this town would do business with me. They were scorching the earth so I would have nowhere to stand. I looked at the digital file on my screen. Recording saved. My father thought he was saving his reputation. He thought he was being clever. But he had just admitted to slander in front of 50 witnesses and a high-fidelity microphone. He had just given me the ammunition to not only win the lawsuit, but to file a separate defamation claim that would bankrupt him personally. I reached for my phone. I dialed the number for the rehab center in Arizona, the one they claimed I was currently checking into. Hello, this is Serenity Springs. How can I help you? A receptionist answered. Hi, I said, my voice calm and professional. My name is Isis Sterling. I am calling to confirm that I am currently a patient in your facility. There was a confused pause. Excuse me, ma'am. If you are calling me, then you are obviously not a patient here. Exactly, I said. I need you to pull your admission records for the last month. Do you have an Isis Sterling in your system? I heard typing. No, ma'am. We have never had a patient by that name. Excellent, I said. I am going to need an affidavit stating exactly that, signed by your director and notarized by tomorrow morning. My lawyer will send over the paperwork in 5 minutes. I hung up. Then I dialed my lawyer. Add a new count to the lawsuit, I said. Defamation of character and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And bring the van around to the front of the estate. Why are we going in, Isis? My lawyer asked. Because I said, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. My father just told everyone I am in Arizona. I think it is time for a miraculous recovery. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness. They were drinking my champagne. They were laughing at my expense. But the party was about to have a surprise guest. And unlike them, I wasn't coming to drink. I was coming to spill. The fluorescent lights of the Midtown law firm hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to drill directly into my temples. I sat at my small gray cubicle, the one positioned right next to the bathroom door, so I could hear every flush and every hand dryer activation. To the world, and especially to my family, this cubicle was my entire life. It was the symbol of my mediocrity. The place where Isis Sterling, the family disappointment, filed papers for $18 an hour, while her brilliant brother bought yachts. But today, the office felt different. The air was thick with whispers. I saw the receptionist glancing at me over her monitor, then quickly looking away when our eyes met. I saw the junior associates huddled by the water cooler, stopping their conversation abruptly as I walked by to refill my mug. They knew. My phone on the desk did not ring. It sat there silent and ominous. But I knew exactly what was happening behind the frosted glass doors of the managing partner's office. I knew because 10 minutes ago, I had received a notification on my private encrypted server. A call had come in to the firm's main line from a number registered to Courtney Sterling. My dear sister-in-law had not wasted a single second. I imagined her voice on the other end of the line, shrill and entitled. I imagined her telling Mr. Henderson that his lowly paralegal was a predator who abused the elderly. I imagined her threatening to blast the firm on social media if they continued to employ a monster like me. She was trying to cut off my oxygen. She wanted me unemployed, desperate, and unable to afford legal counsel. She wanted to starve me out until I crawled back to them, begging for forgiveness and signing over the inheritance. The door to Mr. Henderson's office opened. "Isis," he called out. His voice was loud, too loud. It echoed through the quiet bullpen. "Can you come in here, please? Bring your things." The heads of every employee in the room snapped up. This was it, the public execution. I stood up slowly. I made sure my shoulders slumped. I let a look of panic wash over my face. I grabbed my purse, clutching it to my chest like a shield. "Yes, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. I walked the long walk to his office, feeling the eyes of my coworkers burning into my back. I knew at least one of them was texting Courtney right now, giving her the play-by-play. I stepped into the office and Mr. Henderson closed the door. The moment the latch clicked, the dynamic in the room shifted instantly. "Mr. Henderson," a man in his 60s with a receding hairline and a nervous tic in his left eye, let out a long exhale. He slumped against the door, looking like he was the one being fired. "Ms. Sterling," he whispered, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "Please tell me that was convincing enough. I hate yelling at you. It feels wrong." "You did perfectly, Arthur," I said, dropping the trembling act immediately. I walked over to his executive chair and sat down, crossing my legs. "Did she threaten to sue the firm?" "She did," Mr. Henderson said, pouring himself a glass of water with shaking hands. "She said that employing you was a liability. She said that the Sterling family would use their influence to destroy our reputation if we did not terminate you immediately for cause. She demanded we mark your file as ineligible for rehire." I nodded, looking at the view of the city skyline from the window. "Excellent," I said. "That is exactly what we needed. Tortious interference with a business contract. Add that to the list of charges, Arthur. She just dug her grave 10 feet deeper." Mr. Henderson looked at me with a mix of awe and terror. "Ms. Sterling, are you sure about this?" he asked. "You are the majority shareholder of this firm. You own the building. You own the holding company that pays my salary. I am technically firing my boss. If the board finds out—" "The board answers to me, Arthur," I interrupted him gently. "And you are not firing me. You are participating in a counterintelligence operation. This is chess, not checkers." I stood up and smoothed my skirt. "Now," I said, "I am going to walk out there. You are going to hand me a cardboard box. You are going to tell me to clear out my desk and leave the premises immediately. You need to sound angry, Arthur. You need to sound disgusted. Can you do that?" Mr. Henderson straightened his tie. He took a deep breath, summoning his inner actor. "I think so," he said. "Good," I said. "Make it count." Mr. Henderson opened the door, and his face transformed into a mask of righteous indignation. "I do not want to hear excuses, Mrs. Sterling," he shouted, his voice booming across the office floor. "This firm has standards. We do not employ people who take advantage of their own family. Here is a box. Pack your personal effects and get out. Security will escort you to the lobby." The silence in the bullpen was deafening. I took the cardboard box from him, my hands shaking theatrically. "But Mr. Henderson, please," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "I need this job. My rent is due next week. I didn't do what they said. Please give me a chance to explain." "Save your explanations for the judge," he spat. "You have 5 minutes." I walked back to my cubicle. I could feel the waves of schadenfreude coming from my coworkers. They were enjoying this. They were watching the fall of the quiet, weird girl who never went to happy hour. I started putting things in the box: a framed photo of my dog, a stapler, a potted succulent that was half dead. I saw Jenny, the receptionist, holding her phone up discreetly under her desk. The red recording light was on. She was live streaming this. Perfect, I thought. Go ahead, Jenny. Send it to Courtney. Let her see me broken. Let her pop another bottle of champagne thinking she has won. I sniffled loudly, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. I hugged the box to my chest and began the walk of shame toward the elevators. As I passed the break room, I heard someone whisper, "Karma is a bitch, isn't it?" I kept my head down. I stepped into the elevator, and the heavy metal doors slid shut, cutting off the whispers and the stares. As the elevator descended the 40 floors to the lobby, I watched the numbers count down. 40, 39, 38. With each floor, the slump in my shoulders disappeared. The fear in my eyes vanished. The trembling in my hands stopped. By the time the doors opened on the ground floor, I was no longer the fired paralegal. I was Isis Sterling. I walked out of the building and into the bright sunlight of the bustling street. I walked over to the nearest trash can and dumped the entire contents of the cardboard box into it. The stapler clattered against the metal. The dead plant fell with a soft thud. I didn't need a stapler. I owned the stationery supplier. A black town car pulled up to the curb. The driver, a man named Marcus who had been my grandfather's security detail for 20 years, stepped out and opened the rear door. "Good afternoon, Ms. Sterling," Marcus said. "Rough day at the office." "You have no idea, Marcus," I said, sliding into the leather seat. I closed the door, and the silence of the luxury vehicle enveloped me. I pulled out my real phone, the one with the secure satellite encryption. It rang almost immediately. I looked at the caller ID. It was the chairman of the board for TechCorp. I answered the phone, my voice crisp and commanding. "This is Sterling, Ms. Sterling." The chairman's voice came through anxious and hurried. "We heard rumors that you were terminated from your position. Our stock dropped 2 points. Please tell me the vote is over. We have the Amazon merger documents on the table. We need your signature to authorize the acquisition. We cannot move $1 billion without your approval." I leaned back in the seat, watching the law firm building disappear in the rearview mirror. "Relax, gentlemen," I said. "The play is over." The termination was a strategic maneuver to expose a hostile party. I am currently en route to the airfield. Have the jet prepped and the contracts ready. "But Ms. Sterling, what about your family?" the chairman asked. "The news is saying they destroyed you." I smiled. A cold, predatory smile. "My family thinks they cut off my income," I said. "They think they took a pawn off the board. They have no idea they just freed the queen to move across the entire map." I hung up the phone. "Marcus, take me to the airport," I said. "And Marcus, send a flower arrangement to Mr. Henderson, white lilies, with a note that says, 'Best performance in a supporting role.'" Courtney wanted a war. She wanted to see me unemployed. Well, she got her wish. The paralegal was unemployed. But the CEO was just getting started. And unlike the paralegal, the CEO did not have an HR department to hold her back. The elevator ride to the 45th floor was silent and smooth. It was the only time in my day where I felt truly weightless. When the doors slid open, they did not reveal a hallway or a reception desk. They opened directly into my sanctuary. I stepped out onto the polished concrete floor of my penthouse. The entire east wall was glass, offering a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. From up here, the people below looked like ants. The lawyers, the judges, the social climbers. Like my family, they were all just tiny dots rushing around in a maze that I could see from above. I kicked off my cheap shoes, the ones I wore to play the role of the struggling paralegal. I walked barefoot across the heated floors to the biometric scanner on the wall. I placed my palm against the cool glass panel. A soft blue light scanned my handprint. "Welcome home, Ms. Sterling," the automated system said in a soothing voice. I walked into the main living area. It was sparse and modern. A white Italian leather sofa, a grand piano that I played when the stress became too much, and on the coffee table, a stack of legal briefs for the Supreme Court case I was currently ghostwriting. My family thought I filed papers for $18 an hour. They thought I lived in a studio apartment, in a bad neighborhood, because that is the address I gave them. That is the apartment I rented just to keep up the charade. But the truth was far more lucrative. I am what the legal world calls a ghost. When a top-tier law firm has a case they cannot afford to lose, but their partners are too busy golfing to do the actual work, they call me. I research the precedents. I find the loopholes. I write the closing arguments that make juries weep and judges nod in agreement. Then I hand the file over. The famous lawyer takes the credit, and I take a check with 6 zeros on it. I have won cases for pharmaceutical companies. I have defended tech giants. I have written the very laws that govern inheritance tax in this state. And my parents thought I was too stupid to understand a will. I walked past the kitchen where my chef had left a prepared meal in the refrigerator and headed straight for the double doors at the end of the hall. This was the only room in the house that my cleaning staff was not allowed to enter. I punched in the code. The heavy magnetic locks disengaged with a solid thud. I pushed the doors open and stepped into my war room. The room was illuminated by the blue glow of 6 computer monitors arranged in a semicircle. But the real focus was the walls. 3 of the 4 walls were covered in clear glass whiteboards, and on those boards, I had mapped out the entire anatomy of the Sterling family's destruction. It looked like the lair of a serial killer or a detective obsessed with a cold case. Red string connected photos to bank statements. Green marker circled dates and times. Black ink detailed every lie they had told in the last decade. I walked over to the wall labeled Lawrence and Patricia. I picked up a red marker. I looked at the complex web of shell companies my father had set up. He thought he was hiding his losses. He thought moving money from one failing account to another would fool the IRS. But he was sloppy. I traced the line from the Sterling construction account to a private account in the Cayman Islands. "You are not expanding to Dubai, Dad," I whispered to the photo of my father. "You are laundering money to pay off loan sharks in Chicago." I drew a thick red line through his picture. I had enough evidence to put him away for 20 years. But I did not want him in prison yet. I wanted him to lose his reputation first. I moved to the next section. Tyson. My brother's section was pathetic. It was mostly just credit card debt and bad crypto investments. He was not a criminal mastermind. He was just a fool with a gambling problem and a wife who demanded a lifestyle he could not afford. Which brought me to the third wall, the largest wall. Courtney. I stared at the intricate diagram I had built for my sister-in-law. Courtney was smarter than the others. She came from old money, or at least the memory of it. She knew how to hide things. She ran a charity foundation called the Sterling Hope Initiative. It was supposed to raise money for underprivileged children. But as I looked at the flow of funds on my monitors, I saw a very different story. I sat down at my main computer console. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I accessed the back end of her foundation's bank account. I had guessed her password 3 months ago. It was her own birthday. Predictable. I pulled up the transaction history for the last 6 months. I filtered the search results. I removed all the small, legitimate donations she made to keep up appearances. I wanted to see the big withdrawals, the ones categorized as administrative expenses or travel. There were dozens of them. $5,000 for a flight, $10,000 for a hotel. But then one transaction caught my eye. It was dated exactly 7 days ago, the date my grandfather died. While I was holding grandfather's hand as he took his last breath, Courtney was supposedly at a charity gala in Nevada. That was her alibi. That was why she wasn't at the hospital. She told the family she was accepting an award on behalf of the foundation. I pulled up the credit card statement linked to that withdrawal. It wasn't a hotel ballroom charge. It wasn't a catering charge. It was a direct withdrawal of $50,000. I traced the merchant ID. It was cryptic, just a series of numbers and letters. But I had software for that. I ran the code through my database. The screen processed for a few seconds, then it pinged. The merchant name appeared in bright green text. The Sapphire Palace Casino Las Vegas. High Limit Lounge. I leaned back in my chair. A cold smile spread across my face. She wasn't at a gala. She was at a casino, and she wasn't spending her own money. She was gambling with the money donated for sick children. But that wasn't even the best part. I looked at the timestamp on the withdrawal. 11:42 p.m. Grandfather died at 11:45 p.m. 3 minutes. 3 minutes before the head of our family left this earth. Courtney was not praying. She was not crying. She was cashing out $50,000 of stolen charity money to place a bet. I stood up and walked to the glass wall. I found the photo of Courtney looking smug at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. I took the thickest red marker I could find. I drew a circle around her face. Then I drew a line to the words, Las Vegas. Then I wrote one word in capital letters underneath it. Checkmate. I capped the marker. The sound was loud in the quiet room. You called me a monster, Courtney, I said to the silent room. You told the world I abused him. But I have the receipts. And tomorrow, when you are sitting on that witness stand acting like a grieving saint, I am going to show the world exactly what you were doing while he died. I turned off the lights in the war room, leaving only the glow of the monitors. The red lines on the walls looked like veins, the veins of a dying beast. I walked out and locked the door. I went to my bedroom and lay down on the silk sheets. I needed to sleep. I needed to be fresh. Because tomorrow I wasn't just going to court. I was going to perform surgery. And I was going to remove the cancer from the Sterling family once and for all. The heavy oak doors of Courtroom 7 closed with a finality that echoed through the high ceilings of the chamber. The air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee mixed with the distinct sharp scent of fear. I sat alone at the defendant's table. To my left, the plaintiff's table was crowded. My parents, Lawrence and Patricia, sat there looking like the picture of grieving dignity. My brother Tyson and his wife Courtney sat directly behind them in the gallery, whispering to each other and checking their phones. And standing in front of them was their lawyer, Mr. Blackwood. He was a man who wore his billable hours on his sleeve. His suit was Italian silk, his watch was a gold Rolex, and his smile was sharp enough to cut glass. My parents had hired the most aggressive shark in Atlanta, a man known for tearing defendants apart until there was nothing left but bones. He paced back and forth in front of the jury box, his shoes clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. He did not look at me. To him, I was not a person. I was just another obstacle to be removed on his way to a payout. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Mr. Blackwood began, his voice booming with theatrical authority. We are here today to discuss a tragedy, not just the death of a beloved patriarch, Cyrus Sterling, but the second tragedy that occurred in the shadows of his declining health, the tragedy of manipulation, the tragedy of greed. He stopped and pointed a finger directly at me. That woman sitting there, he shouted. Isis Sterling. She looks innocent, doesn't she? She sits there quietly in her discount suit looking small and harmless. But do not let that fool you. For 2 years, while her family was working hard to build their legacy, she was whispering poison into the ear of a dying man. She isolated him. She barred his own son from visiting. She twisted his mind until he could no longer tell the difference between family loyalty and a predator's trap. I sat perfectly still. I did not flinch. I did not shake my head. I kept my hands folded on the empty table in front of me. I stared straight ahead, focusing on the grain of the wood on the judge's bench. My silence was not submission, it was strategy. In my line of work, I had learned that the person who speaks first loses. The person who reacts shows their hand. So I became a statue, a gray rock that gave them nothing to latch onto. Mr. Blackwood continued his opening statement, painting a vivid and completely fabricated picture of my life. He described me as a failed artist, a drifting soul who had never held a real job. He claimed I was bitter about my siblings' success. He claimed I saw my grandfather not as a loved one, but as a winning lottery ticket. Isis Sterling saw an opportunity, he said, leaning on the jury rail. She saw a vulnerable old man with a heavy checkbook and she pounced. She traded trays of soup for millions of dollars. And today, we are asking you to right that wrong. We are asking you to return the Sterling legacy to its rightful owners. He sat down looking satisfied. My mother patted his arm affectionately. The bailiff stood up. The prosecution calls Patricia Sterling to the stand. My mother stood up slowly. She was wearing a modest black dress and a single strand of pearls. She looked nothing like the woman who had screamed at me in the lawyer's office yesterday. She looked fragile. She held a tissue in her hand, dabbing at dry eyes before she even took the oath. She walked to the witness stand and sat down. She looked at the jury with wide, tearful eyes. Mrs. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling. Blackwood asked softly, "Can you tell the court about your relationship with your daughter Isis?" My mother let out a shaky breath. She looked at me for a brief second, and the look of sadness on her face was so convincing it almost made me applaud. "I love my daughter," she said, her voice breaking perfectly. "I have always loved her. But Isis has always been difficult. Even as a child, she was distant. We tried to include her. We tried to give her the same opportunities as Tyson. But she rejected us. She rejected our help. She preferred to be alone." "And how did this affect her relationship with your father, Cyrus Sterling?" Mr. Blackwood asked. My mother wiped her nose with the tissue. "When my father got sick, we wanted to hire the best nurses. We wanted him to be comfortable. But Isis insisted on moving in. We thought she was trying to be helpful. We thought she finally wanted to be part of the family. But then, she stopped answering our calls." She paused, letting a tear roll down her cheek. "I went to the house every week," she sobbed. "I brought his favorite meals. I brought photos of the grandchildren. But Isis would meet me at the door. She would tell me he was sleeping. She would tell me he didn't want to see me. I begged her. I just wanted to hold my father's hand. But she slammed the door in my face. She stole those last moments from me. I listened to her lie. I felt the anger rising in my chest, hot and sharp. I remembered those visits. I remembered them vividly. She did come to the door, but she didn't bring meals. She brought documents. She brought power of attorney forms she wanted him to sign. She brought real estate agents to appraise the house while he was still living in it. And when I told her he was too weak to see her, she didn't beg. She screamed. She called him a stubborn old goat and told me to get out of her way. But the jury didn't know that. All they saw was a weeping mother and a cold, silent daughter. Mr. Blackwood handed her a glass of water. "Take your time, Mrs. Sterling." "Thank you," she whispered. "It hurts so much to say this. But I believe Isis realized that if we spent time with him, we would see that his mind was failing. She needed him isolated so she could convince him to change the will. She took advantage of his dementia. It is the only explanation for why a man who built an empire would leave everything to a girl who has never worked a day in her life." The jury turned to look at me. Their eyes were hard. They saw a monster. They saw a parasite. I remained frozen. I did not take notes. I did not whisper to a co-counsel. I just sat there alone at the wide wooden table, my silence filling the room like a heavy fog. Mr. Blackwood finished his questioning. "Thank you, Mrs. Sterling. Your witness." He gestured toward me, expecting a lawyer to stand up and cross-examine her. The judge looked at me. The opposing counsel looked at me. The entire room waited. I did not move. "Sterling," the judge said, "do you wish to cross-examine the witness?" I slowly turned my head. I looked at my mother. She was staring at me with a mix of triumph and contempt. She thought she had won. She thought her performance was Oscar-worthy. "No, Your Honor," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I have no questions for the witness at this time." A murmur went through the courtroom. Mr. Blackwood smirked. He thought I was incompetent. He thought I was overwhelmed. He thought I was giving up. My mother stepped down from the witness stand. As she walked past the defense table, she slowed down just enough so that only I could hear her. She leaned in slightly, her face hidden from the judge by the angle of her body. The sad, grieving mother mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the cold predator underneath. She looked at my empty table. She looked at the notepad with no writing on it. "Look at you," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You look pathetic sitting there all alone. Could you not even afford a public defender, Isis? You are going to lose everything, and I am going to laugh while I watch them evict you." She straightened up, dabbed her eye with the tissue again, and walked back to her seat next to my father, who squeezed her hand in support. I watched her go. I watched the performance conclude. They thought my lack of a lawyer was a sign of poverty. They thought my silence was a sign of weakness. They didn't realize that I didn't need a lawyer because I knew the law better than anyone in this room. They didn't realize that I wasn't cross-examining her yet because I was waiting for the trap to be fully set. I looked up at the bench. I saw Judge Holloway adjusting his glasses, peering down at the docket. He looked bored. He looked ready to wrap this up. But then he picked up the case file. He opened it to the first page. And for the first time since the trial began, he actually looked at the name printed on the defendant's line. The air in the room was about to change. My mother's smirk was about to become the last happy expression she would wear for a very long time. I sat back in my chair and waited for the recognition to hit. The courtroom was filled with a low hum of whispers that sounded like a hive of angry bees. My mother had returned to her seat next to my father, and she was putting on a masterclass in performative grief. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, while my father rubbed her back, acting the part of the supportive husband. Even the jury looked moved. I could see the older woman in the front row shaking her head at me, looking at me with undisguised disgust. To them, I was exactly what Mr. Blackwood had painted me to be. A cold, heartless failure who had preyed on a dying man. Mr. Blackwood was leaning back in his chair, looking satisfied. He checked his gold Rolex, probably calculating how many minutes until he could leave for his lunch reservation at the Capitol Grill. He did not even look at me. In his mind, the case was already won. He had the sympathetic witness. He had the narrative. And he had a defendant who was too broke to hire a lawyer and too stupid to cross-examine. I sat alone at the defendant's table. My hands were folded on the empty surface. I did not fidget. I did not look down. I kept my eyes fixed on the man sitting high above us all. Judge Holloway. He was a man known for his impatience with frivolous lawsuits. He was currently flipping through the case file with a frown on his face. He looked bored. He looked like a man who wanted to be anywhere else. He picked up a pen and tapped it rhythmically against the bench, a sound that echoed in the silent room. He turned a page, then another. Then he stopped. The tapping ceased. Judge Holloway leaned forward. He squinted at the document in front of him. He reached up and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, pushing them up the bridge of his nose. He brought the paper closer to his face, as if he could not believe what he was reading. He looked up. His eyes scanned the courtroom, passing over Mr. Blackwood, passing over my parents, and landing squarely on me. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. It was not the look of a judge looking at a criminal. It was the look of a scholar recognizing a peer. He looked back down at the paper, then back at me. "Excuse me," the judge said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that instantly silenced the murmurs in the gallery. Mr. Blackwood stood up, buttoning his jacket, thinking the judge was addressing him. "Yes, Your Honor. If you are ready to issue a summary judgment, we are certainly—" "Sit down." "Mr. Blackwood," the judge snapped without looking at him. "I am not talking to you." Mr. Blackwood froze, his mouth hanging open slightly. He sank back into his chair, confused. The judge turned his entire body toward me. He took off his glasses and held them in his hand. "Ms. Sterling," the judge said. I stood up slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge looked at the file again. "I am looking at the defendant's full legal name here. Isis Amara Sterling. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor, that is correct." And the judge continued, his voice taking on a tone of genuine disbelief. "Are you the same Isis Sterling who authored the paper titled The Ethics of Testamentary Capacity in the Modern Era, published in the Harvard Law Review last year?" I nodded once. "I am, Your Honor." The judge let out a short, stunned breath. He leaned back in his leather chair. And are you the same Isis Sterling who ghostwrote the draft legislation for the Georgia Modern Inheritance Act, the very act that this court uses as a standard for evaluating undue influence cases? The very act I used to teach my advanced probate seminar at Emory University last semester. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady and projecting to the back of the room. I wrote that legislation 3 years ago. For a moment, nobody moved. It was as if time had stopped. Then I heard a sound. It was the sound of Mr. Blackwood dropping his expensive Mont Blanc pen onto the floor. It clattered loudly, rolling under the table. I turned slightly to look at my family. The transformation was horrific and beautiful. My mother Patricia had stopped crying. The tissue was frozen halfway to her face. Her eyes were wide, staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. She looked at my father, hoping for an explanation, but Lawrence Sterling looked like he was having a cardiac event. His face had drained of all color, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. Courtney, who had been smirking in the gallery a moment ago, now had her hand over her mouth. Her eyes darted from me to the judge, trying to process what had just happened. They had spent years calling me a failure. They had spent years telling their friends I was a receptionist or a paralegal. They had never bothered to ask what I actually did. They never bothered to Google my name. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they didn't realize the expert on the law they were trying to use against me was the woman they were suing. Judge Holloway shook his head, letting out a dry chuckle of disbelief. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, turning his gaze to the plaintiff's lawyer, "do you realize that you are accusing the architect of the state's inheritance laws of not understanding how an inheritance works? You are accusing the woman who wrote the definition of undue influence of committing it. This is absurd." Mr. Blackwood stood up, knocking his chair back. He was sweating now. Visible beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead. "Your Honor, my clients were not aware. We believed she was a paralegal." "Ignorance is not a defense in my courtroom, counselor," the judge barked. He turned back to me. His expression softened. It became respectful, almost deferential. "Ms. Sterling, I must apologize. When I saw the name on the docket, I assumed it was a coincidence. I did not realize we had a legal scholar of your caliber in the room. I assume, given your background, you have elected to represent yourself pro se, not out of financial necessity, but out of competence." "That is correct, Your Honor," I replied. I felt the best use of the court's time was to handle this matter personally. The judge nodded. He looked at Mr. Blackwood with disdain. "Well then, Mrs. Sterling, since you are representing yourself and since the plaintiff has rested their initial examination of the witness, I believe you declined to cross-examine earlier. Would you like to reconsider that decision in light of these facts?" I looked at the jury. They were no longer looking at me with disgust. They were looking at me with curiosity. They were leaning forward. The narrative had flipped. I was no longer the greedy granddaughter. I was the expert. I was the authority. I looked at my mother. She was shrinking in her seat, trying to make herself invisible. She knew. In that moment, she knew she had made a fatal miscalculation. I adjusted the lapels of my navy blazer. I picked up a single sheet of paper from my table. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I would like to reconsider." I stepped out from behind the defense table. I walked to the center of the room. The sound of my heels on the hardwood floor was rhythmic and confident. I stopped directly in front of the witness stand. I turned to the gallery. I made eye contact with Courtney. I made eye contact with Tyson. And finally, I locked eyes with my mother. "Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing out clear and cold, "I would like to recall the witness." I pointed a finger at the woman shaking in the front row. "I call Patricia Sterling back to the stand, and I would remind her that she is still under oath, and that perjury in the state of Georgia is a felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison." My mother let out a small whimper. My father tried to grab her hand, but she pulled away. She stood up, her legs trembling so badly she had to grab the back of the bench for support. The bailiff opened the gate for her. She walked past me. I smelled her expensive perfume mixed with the scent of fear. As she sat down in the witness chair, she looked small. The grieving mother act was gone. Now she was just a liar caught in a trap of her own making. I walked up to the podium. I placed my single sheet of paper down. It wasn't notes. It was a bank statement. "Hello, Mother," I said. She didn't answer. "Let's talk about those visits to grandfather's house," I continued. "The ones where you said you brought him soup." I leaned forward. "Are you ready to tell the jury what was really in those Tupperware containers? Or should I play the security footage from the kitchen?" The judge leaned forward. The jury held its breath. And the slaughter began. The courtroom air was thick with tension, the kind of heaviness that usually precedes a thunderstorm. My mother sat in the front row, her face pale, her hands trembling in her lap. She had just been humiliated, but I wasn't done. I had dismantled the matriarch, and now it was time to topple the king. "Your Honor," I said, turning my back on the gallery and facing the judge. "The defense calls Lawrence Sterling to the stand." My father stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, a reflex he had whenever he felt threatened. He adjusted his silk tie and walked to the witness stand with a strut that was entirely unearned. He looked at the jury and offered them a tight, practiced smile. He was trying to project the image of the grieving, successful businessman, the captain of industry, who was being persecuted by an ungrateful daughter. He sat down and placed his hand on the Bible. He swore to tell the truth. I almost laughed. Lawrence Sterling had not told the truth since 1998. I walked to the podium. I didn't look at my notes. I didn't need them. I had memorized every digit of his financial failures. "Mr. Sterling," I began, my voice respectful but firm. "You stated in your deposition that you are the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, is that correct?" My father leaned into the microphone. His voice was deep and resonant, the voice he used to charm investors. "That is correct, Isis. I have run the family business for 30 years. I built it into the empire it is today." "And how would you describe the current financial health of this empire?" I asked. My father chuckled. It was a condescending sound. "The company is thriving. We are looking at record profits this quarter. In fact, as I mentioned to my associates earlier, we are in the final stages of opening a branch in Dubai. We are global now." I nodded slowly, acting impressed. "Global," I repeated. "That sounds very expensive and very successful. So it stands to reason that a man running a global empire would have significant personal wealth, correct?" My father puffed out his chest. "I have done well for myself. I provide a very comfortable life for your mother and your brother. It is a shame you chose not to be a part of it." I ignored the jab. "So, Mr. Sterling, if you are so wealthy, why did you petition the court to freeze grandfather's assets immediately upon his death? You claimed in your filing that without immediate access to the estate, you would suffer, quote, irreparable financial harm, end quote." My father shifted in his seat. He cleared his throat. "Well, that is just standard legal language, Isis. It is about liquidity. Cash flow. Wealthy people do not keep their money in checking accounts. Our capital is tied up in investments. Real estate, stocks." "I see," I said. "Investments." I picked up a document from my table. It was a single sheet of paper, stamped with the logo of the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Mr. Sterling, I am holding a certified audit of your personal brokerage account. Can you tell the court what the balance of this account was as of this morning?" My father's eyes darted to his lawyer, Mr. Blackwood. But Mr. Blackwood was looking at his shoes, realizing he had walked into a massacre. I do not check the daily balance," my father stammered. "The market fluctuates." "Does it fluctuate to zero?" I asked. The room went silent. "Because according to this audit," I said, holding the paper up for the jury to see, "you liquidated your entire stock portfolio 5 years ago. Every single share. Apple, Google, Amazon. You sold it all." My father's face turned a blotchy shade of red. I I was rebalancing my portfolio. I moved that money into other ventures. Ventures, I asked. Is that what we are calling the Lucky 7 Loan Shark Agency in downtown Atlanta? I picked up another document. This one was a high-interest loan agreement. Exhibit C, Your Honor. A promissory note signed by Lawrence Sterling dated 6 months ago, borrowing $200,000 at an interest rate of 25%. I walked closer to the witness stand. Mr. Sterling, why does a global CEO need to borrow money from a predatory lender at 25% interest? Is it to fund the expansion to Dubai? Or is it to pay the interest on the 3 mortgages you took out on the family home without mother's knowledge? My father was sweating profusely now. The sweat dripped down his temples, staining his expensive collar. You don't understand business. He snapped, his voice losing its smooth charm. You have to leverage debt. It is how the rich stay rich. Leverage, I said flatly. I said. Interesting word. I picked up the final document. It was a bank statement from a secret account my father thought he had hidden under a shell company name. Let's talk about leverage, Mr. Sterling. And let's talk about expenses. Because while you were borrowing money from sharks, and while you were telling the court you needed grandfather's money to survive, you were making a very specific recurring monthly payment. I turned the page. $50,000 a month, every month for the last 3 years, to an entity listed as the Sugar Palace, LLC. My father stopped breathing. His eyes went wide with genuine terror. He looked at my mother in the front row. I looked at the transaction details. I continued. And I did some digging. The Sugar Palace is not a business consultancy. It is not a real estate firm. It is a private account linked to a woman named Candy. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that was amplified by the microphone. Mr. Sterling, can you explain to the jury and to your wife sitting right there what kind of investment advice Candy provides for $50,000 a month? My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish flopping on a dock. Is it real estate advice? I pressed. Does she help you with the Dubai expansion? Or is Candy the reason you sold your stocks, drained your savings, and are currently trying to steal an inheritance that does not belong to you? Answer the question, Lawrence. Who is Candy? The silence in the courtroom was heavy enough to crush a man. My father looked at the judge, he looked at the jury, and then he looked at my mother. And in that moment, the facade of the successful businessman crumbled completely, leaving only a pathetic broke liar sitting in the witness chair. And then the screaming started. I did not have to wait for an answer. My mother, Patricia Sterling, provided the answer for him. Candy, she shrieked. Her voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the voice of the poised society woman. It was the voice of a woman who had just realized her entire life was a lie. She stood up so fast her chair fell over with a loud crash. She ignored the bailiff. She ignored the judge. She marched toward the witness stand, her eyes locked on my father. You told me we were broke because of the economy, she screamed. You told me we had to fire the housekeeper because of inflation. You made me sell my mother's jewelry, Lawrence, and you were giving it to some stripper named Candy. Patricia, please sit down, my father begged, holding his hands up in defense. It is not what you think. It is a consulting fee. She is a consultant. A consultant, my mother yelled. She reached the witness stand. The bailiff was running toward her, but he was too late. She swung her hand with all the force of 30 years of repressed anger. The slap was louder than the gavel. It connected with my father's face with a sickening crack. His head snapped back. His glasses flew off his face and skittered across the floor, landing near the court reporter's feet. Order, Judge Holloway shouted, banging his gavel repeatedly. Order in this court. Bailiff, restrain that woman. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The jurors were gasping, whispering frantically to each other. The court reporter looked terrified. Mr. Blackwood put his head in his hands, realizing his career was likely over. I stood there in the middle of the storm, perfectly still. I watched the bailiff gently grab my mother's arms, pulling her away from my father. She was sobbing now, hysterical broken sounds that echoed off the high ceiling. "He is a liar," she screamed at the jury. "He is a broke liar. He told me he was a genius. He told me he would take care of me." My father sat in the witness chair holding his cheek, looking small and defeated. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like exactly what he was, a fraud. I looked at the judge. Judge Holloway was red in the face, furious at the loss of control in his courtroom. "Ms. Sterling," the judge barked at me. "Do you have any further questions for this witness?" I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had called me a failure my whole life. The man who had judged me for my cheap shoes while he was burning millions on a secret life. "No, Your Honor," I said calmly. "I think the witness has said everything he needs to say." I walked back to my table and sat down. My mother was escorted back to her seat, sobbing into her hands. My father was led off the stand, still looking for his glasses, but the show wasn't over. There was one more rat on the sinking ship, and rats panic when the water rises. Suddenly, from the gallery directly behind where my parents were sitting, my brother Tyson stood up. He didn't look sad. He didn't look worried about his parents' marriage imploding. He looked terrified for his own wallet. He saw the inheritance evaporating. He saw the yacht disappearing. He saw the easy life he felt entitled to slipping through his fingers. "This is ridiculous," Tyson shouted, his voice cracking. "Who cares about Dad's affairs? That doesn't prove anything about the will." "Sit down, sir," the bailiff warned, moving toward him. "No, I will not sit down," Tyson yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You think you have won ISIS. You think just because Dad is broke you can take everything. Well, guess what? We don't need Dad's money." He grabbed Courtney's arm, pulling his wife up from her seat. Courtney looked horrified. She tried to pull away, but Tyson held on tight. "My wife has money," Tyson declared, his eyes wild with desperation. "You forgot who she is, didn't you, Isis? She is a Hamilton. Her father is the senator. She has a trust fund that makes your inheritance look like pocket change. So go ahead, keep the building. We don't need it. Courtney is going to buy us a house twice as big." The courtroom fell silent again. All eyes turned to Courtney. I looked at my sister-in-law, the woman who had sneered at me in the rain, the woman who had bragged about custom yachts. She wasn't looking at Tyson with love. She was looking at him with pure, unadulterated panic. Her face had gone completely white. She was shaking her head slightly, mouthing the words, "Stop." But Tyson was too stupid to stop. "Tell her, babe," Tyson said, nudging her. "Tell her we are rich. Tell her we are going to bury her in legal fees until she begs for mercy." I leaned back in my chair. A small, cold smile played on my lips. Tyson had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had just tied his raft to an anchor thinking it was a life preserver. I looked at the judge. "Your Honor," I said softly, "since Mr. Tyson Sterling has so graciously introduced the topic of his wife's finances, I would like to call my next witness." I looked directly at Courtney. "I call Courtney Sterling to the stand, and I would like her to bring her purse, because I believe she has a receipt in there that the court needs to see." Courtney's knees buckled. She sank back into the bench, burying her face in her hands. Tyson looked confused. "Babe, what is wrong? Tell them." I picked up my red marker and drew a circle in the air. The father was down, the mother was broken, and now it was time for the final execution. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut behind me as the judge called for a 15-minute recess. The air in the hallway felt cooler, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins made my skin burn. Inside the chamber, my family was in shambles. My father was broken. My mother was humiliated. But there was one head left on the hydra that needed to be severed. Courtney. I watched her rush out of the courtroom. She did not go to comfort her husband. She did not go to check on her sobbing mother-in-law. She clutched her designer purse to her chest and made a beeline for the ladies' restroom at the far end of the corridor. Her face was a mask of panic and fury. She needed a safe space to regroup. She needed a place to vent. She thought the restroom was a sanctuary. She forgot that in a building this old, the ventilation ducts carry sound like a telephone wire. And she definitely forgot that I had entered the restroom exactly 30 seconds before her slipping silently into the handicap stall at the far end and locking the door. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet, my feet pulled up so they would not be visible under the gap. I held my breath. The door to the restroom banged open. The sound of Courtney's heels clicking aggressively on the tile floor echoed off the porcelain walls. She didn't check the stalls. She assumed she was alone because who else would be in a public courthouse bathroom during the trial of the century? I heard the sound of a lock clicking on the stall door furthest from me. Then the distinct sound of frantic dialing. "Pick up, Mother," Courtney hissed. "Pick up, pick up, pick up, pick!" There was a pause, then a sigh of relief. "Mom," she whispered. But it was a loud whisper, the kind that bounces off bathroom tiles. "You have to help me. It is a disaster. The whole thing is falling apart." I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the voice memo app. I pressed the big red record button. The waveform on the screen jumped as it caught her voice. "No, Mom, you do not understand," Courtney snapped. "Lawrence is an idiot. He got caught. He has no money. He has been spending it all on some stripper. I know it is disgusting. I knew marrying into this family was a risk, but I thought at least the old man had cash." She paused, listening to her mother on the other end. "I don't care about Tyson," she shouted, her voice rising. "Tyson is a spineless loser. I can divorce him any time, but I need to secure the bag first. If we lose this lawsuit, I walk away with nothing. I wasted 3 years of my life pretending to like these people." I watched the red timer on my phone count up. 40 seconds, 50 seconds. This was gold. But I needed more. I needed the real Courtney. "Yes, I am playing the victim," she said, laughing a cold, cruel sound. "The jury is eating it up. They look at me and they see a sweet, innocent white girl being bullied by her husband's aggressive family. It is easy. I just cry a little and they melt." Then her voice dropped lower, filled with a venom that chilled the air. "I just need to get through one more hour, Mom. Once I get the settlement, I am filing for divorce. I am taking the money and I am going back to Connecticut. I am done with Atlanta. I am done with the humidity. And I am definitely done with these stupid black people and their drama. They think they are so special because they have a little money, but they are just trash wrapped in Gucci." My thumb hovered over the stop button. Stupid black people. Trash wrapped in Gucci. There it was. The hate crime disguised as a marriage. "I just need the old man's money," she continued. "I earned it, Mom. I had to let those people hug me. I had to eat their greasy food. I earned every penny." I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I named it The Real Courtney. I lowered my feet to the floor. I flushed the toilet. The sound was like a thunderclap in the quiet restroom. I heard Courtney gasp. Silence fell instantly. I unlocked my stall door slowly. The metal latch scraped loudly against the frame. I pushed the door open and stepped out. I walked to the sinks. I pumped some soap onto my hands. I turned on the faucet. I washed my hands thoroughly, taking my time. I looked at myself in the mirror. My navy blazer was sharp. My expression was calm. I looked at the reflection of the stall door behind me. Courtney stepped out. Her face was drained of all color. She was holding her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Isis," she stammered. How long have you been in here?" I turned off the water. I grabbed a paper towel and dried my hands. "Long enough, Courtney," I said. I turned to face her. She backed up, hitting the wall. "You know," I said, leaning against the sink, "the acoustics in here are really wonderful. The tile really amplifies the high frequencies, especially the frequency of a racist meltdown." She swallowed hard. You can't use that. It is illegal to record someone without their consent." I smiled. Actually, in the state of Georgia, only one party needs to consent to a recording. And since I was a party to this conversation by virtue of being in the room, I consented. I held up my phone. The screen was still glowing. "See you back in court, sister-in-law," I said. I walked past her. She reached out to grab my arm, but I sidestepped her effortlessly. "Wait," she begged, her voice desperate. "Isis, wait. We can make a deal. I will make Tyson settle. I will make them drop the lawsuit. Just delete it, please. My father is a senator. This will ruin him." I stopped at the door. I looked back at her. "Your father should have taught you better," I said. "He should have taught you that money can buy a lot of things, Courtney. But it cannot buy silence. Not anymore." I walked out, leaving her trembling in the cold, sterile light of the bathroom. The recess was over. And so was she. The bailiff called the court to order. Everyone stood up as Judge Holloway returned to the bench. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. My father was slumped in his chair looking at the floor. My mother was staring blankly at the wall. Tyson was chewing his fingernails, looking nervously at the empty witness stand. And then Courtney walked in. She looked like she was walking to the gallows. She tried to smile at the jury, but it looked like a grimace. She sat down next to Tyson, but she didn't look at him. She looked at me. Her eyes were pleading. She was begging me with her eyes to show mercy. But mercy was not on the docket today. I stood up. "Your Honor," I said. "The defense calls Courtney Sterling to the stand." Courtney stood up on shaky legs. She walked to the stand. She took the oath. Her hand was shaking so bad she almost dropped the Bible. She sat down. She smoothed her skirt. She took a sip of water. I walked to the podium. I placed my phone on the wooden surface in plain view. Courtney's eyes locked onto it. "Mrs. Sterling." I began, my voice gentle, almost kind. "You testified earlier that you loved my grandfather, Cyrus Sterling, very much. Is that correct?" "Yes," she whispered. "I loved him like my own grandfather. And you testified that you were heartbroken when he passed away." "Devastated," she said, gaining a little confidence. "I cried for days." I nodded. "Where were you, Mrs. Sterling, on the night of October 14th? The night my grandfather died?" Courtney blinked. She licked her dry lips. I was at a charity gala," she said. "In Nevada. For the Sterling Hope Initiative. We were raising money for pediatric cancer. I wanted to be home with Cyrus, but I had a duty to the children." "A duty," I repeated. "That sounds very noble. So you were at the gala from what time to what time?" "From 7 p.m. until midnight," she said. "I gave the keynote speech." "I see." I picked up a document from my table. "Your Honor, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit D. These are the GPS location logs from Mrs. Sterling's cell phone provider, subpoenaed this morning." Courtney froze. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, looking at the paper, "according to this, your phone was indeed in Las Vegas on the night in question. But it was not at the convention center where the gala was held." I looked up at her. "From 8 p.m. until 3 a.m., your phone was stationary at a location called the Sapphire Palace, specifically the high-limit slot machine lounge." The jury murmured. Courtney shook her head. That must be a mistake," she stammered. "The GPS is wrong. I was at the gala. I have witnesses. We checked the gala logs too," I said. "You signed in at 7. You left at 7:15. You spent 15 minutes with the sick children, Courtney. And you spent 7 hours at the casino." "I am not a gambler," she shouted. I was meeting a donor." "A donor?" I asked. "Interesting." I picked up another piece of paper. "Because this bank statement from your charity account shows a $50,000 withdrawal at the casino cage at 11:42 p.m. I took a step closer. "My grandfather died at 11:45 p.m. Courtney. 3 minutes later. While his heart was stopping, you were cashing out charity money to play blackjack." "No," she screamed. "That is a lie. You are twisting everything." "Am I twisting it?" I asked. Or am I just revealing who you really are? I walked back to the podium. I picked up my phone. You claim you love this family, Courtney. You claim you are the victim here. But I think the jury deserves to hear what you really think of the Sterlings. I tapped the screen. Your Honor, I would like to introduce one final piece of evidence. A digital recording taken approximately 10 minutes ago during the court recess. Courtney stood up. No, you cannot play that. It is private. The judge looked at me. Is this relevant to the case, Ms. Sterling? It goes to the witness's credibility, Your Honor, I said. And to her motive for this entire lawsuit. Allow it, the judge said. I pressed play. Courtney's voice boomed through the courtroom speakers, clear and sharp. I don't care about Tyson. He is a spineless loser. I just need to secure the bag. Tyson's head snapped up. He looked at his wife in horror. The recording continued. I am done with these stupid black people and their drama. They are just trash wrapped in Gucci. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The jurors looked at Courtney with open mouths. The judge looked furious. My mother covered her face with her hands. I stopped the recording. Trash wrapped in Gucci, I repeated. Is that how you see your husband, Courtney? Is that how you saw my grandfather? Just a source of money that you had to tolerate? Courtney was hyperventilating. Her face was red. She looked trapped. She looked like a cornered animal. And then she snapped. She slammed her hands down on the witness stand. Yes, she screamed. Yes, that is what you are. Look at you. You think you are so smart with your little suits and your little words. But you are nothing. She pointed a shaking finger at the jury. You tricked me, she yelled, her eyes wild. You gamed the system. But they won't believe you. Look at this jury. They know who I am. I am a Hamilton. My father is a senator. I am a white woman in America, and you are just a... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly, unspoken, but heard by everyone. The courtroom erupted. The judge was banging his gavel so hard I thought the handle would break. Get her off the stand, the judge roared. Removal, now! Courtney was still screaming as the bailiff grabbed her arm. I am the victim here, she shrieked as she was dragged away. I am the victim. They stole my money. They stole my life. I stood there calmly watching her self-destruct. She had bet everything on her privilege. She thought her skin color and her last name would protect her from the truth. She thought she could charm the jury and crush the black sheep. But she forgot one thing. Sheep get slaughtered. But I wasn't a sheep. I was the wolf who had finally come home to eat. The courtroom was silent, but it was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of a held breath. Courtney had been dragged out screaming, leaving a vacuum of shock in her wake. The jury looked exhausted. They had seen the ugly underbelly of a wealthy family, and they were disgusted. But I needed one more nail in the coffin. I needed to prove that not only were they greedy, but they were completely absent when it mattered most. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. The defense calls its final witness, Mrs. Clara Higgins. The heavy doors opened and a woman in her 60s walked in. She was wearing a simple navy blue dress and sensible shoes. She walked with the kind of dignity that cannot be bought, the kind that comes from a lifetime of service. Mrs. Higgins had been the head nurse at the private hospice care agency that looked after my grandfather for the last 2 years of his life. She was the woman who had held his hand when I stepped out to use the restroom. She was the woman who had washed his body. She was the woman who knew the truth. My mother, Patricia, looked at Mrs. Higgins and frowned. She whispered something to my father. I knew exactly what she was saying. She was asking who this woman was. My mother did not recognize the woman who had cared for her own father for 700 days. That was all the jury needed to know, but I was going to make sure they heard it out loud. Mrs. Higgins took the stand. She adjusted her glasses and looked at me with a warm, grandmotherly smile. Mrs. Higgins, I began, can you tell the court what your relationship was to the late Cyrus Sterling? I was his lead palliative care nurse. She said, her voice soft but firm. I was with him 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for the last 18 months of his life. I nodded. And in those 18 months, Mrs. Higgins, how often did you see the defendant, Isis Sterling? Mrs. Higgins smiled. Every day. Miss Isis was there every single evening after work. She would bring her laptop and work quietly in the corner while he slept. When he woke up, she would read to him. She learned how to change his oxygen tank. She learned how to adjust his pillows so he wouldn't get bed sores. Toward the end, when he couldn't feed himself, she was the one who spoon-fed him his broth. She never complained. Not once. The jury looked at me. Their expressions were soft. "And what about the plaintiffs?" I asked, pointing to the table where my parents and Tyson sat. "Lawrence Sterling, Patricia Sterling, Tyson Sterling. How often did you see them?" Mrs. Higgins' expression hardened. She looked at them with profound disappointment. "I saw Mr. Lawrence and Mrs. Patricia maybe 4 times in 2 years," she said. "They would come for 15 minutes. They usually stayed in the hallway because Mrs. Patricia said the smell of the medicine made her nauseous. They never touched him. They never asked me how he was doing. They only asked if he was lucid enough to sign papers." My mother gasped. "That is a lie," she hissed. Mrs. Higgins ignored her and continued. "And the young man Tyson. I saw him once. It was about 3 weeks before Mr. Cyrus passed. Can you describe that visit?" I asked. Mrs. Higgins took a deep breath. She looked down at her hands as if the memory was painful. "He came in with his wife, the loud blonde woman who was just here. Mr. Cyrus was having a bad day. He was in a lot of pain, and he was drifting in and out of consciousness. Tyson and his wife walked right up to the bed. They didn't say hello. They pulled out their phones. They leaned over his unconscious body and took a selfie. The wife said something about needing content for her sympathy posts. Then she asked me if I could move the oxygen tube because it was ruining the aesthetic of the photo." A collective groan went through the jury box. One juror, a middle-aged man, shook his head in open disgust. "They took the photo and left," Mrs. Higgins said. "They were in the room for less than 3 minutes. Mr. Cyrus woke up right after they left and asked who had been there. I didn't have the heart to tell him it was his grandson because he didn't even say goodbye." I let that sink in. The image of Courtney and Tyson using a dying man as a prop for social media likes was more damaging than any bank statement. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins," I said. I started to turn away, but Mrs. Higgins spoke up. "Excuse me, Miss Isis," she said. "There is one more thing." I turned back. "Yes." "Mr. Cyrus gave me something," she said, reaching into her pocket. About 2 days before he passed, he had a moment of complete clarity. He asked me to bring him his safe box. He put something in an envelope and sealed it. He made me promise on my nursing license that I would keep it safe. She pulled out a small black object. It was a USB drive. He told me, she said, looking directly at my parents. He said, "Clara, you keep this hidden. And you only bring it out if the vultures start circling. He said if they accept the will with grace, destroy this. But if they try to attack Isis, if they try to drag her name through the mud, you bring this to court." She held the drive out to me. "I think the vultures are circling," she said. I took the drive. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of my grandfather's foresight. "Your Honor," I said, turning to the bench, "I would like to enter this into evidence, and I would like to request permission to play the contents of this drive for the court immediately." Mr. Blackwood jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. We have no idea what is on that drive. It could be doctored. It could be—" "Overruled," Judge Holloway said instantly. He was leaning forward, his eyes locked on the USB drive. "The witness has testified to its chain of custody. Play it, Ms. Sterling." I walked to the court technician's desk. I handed him the drive. My parents were frozen. My father looked like he was about to vomit. My mother was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. They knew. Deep down they knew that Cyrus Sterling was not a man who left loose ends. The technician plugged the drive in. The large projection screen on the wall flickered to life. The lights in the courtroom were dimmed. And then, suddenly, there he was. Grandfather. He was sitting in his favorite leather armchair in the library. He looked frail. His breathing was labored. But his eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of the man who had built a dynasty. He was looking directly into the camera lens. I stood in the dark watching him. Tears pricked my eyes. I missed him so much. But this wasn't a sentimental goodbye. This was business. The video began to play. The sound of his voice, raspy but commanding, filled the room. My parents held their breath, and the dead man began to speak. "Hello, Lawrence? Hello, Patricia. Hello, Tyson." The voice on the screen was like a ghost haunting the courtroom. My grandfather, Cyrus Sterling, looked into the camera lens with a gaze so piercing it felt like he was staring right through the screen and into the souls of the people sitting at the plaintiff's table. "If you are watching this," he said, taking a slow, wheezing breath, "it means you did exactly what I knew you would do. It means you sued ISIS." On screen, grandfather reached for a glass of water. His hand shook slightly, but he steadied it with sheer willpower. "I am making this recording on October 12th. I am of sound mind, though my body is failing me. I am recording this because I know my son. I know that Lawrence has always believed he was entitled to what he did not earn. And I know that Patricia believes appearances are more important than integrity." My mother let out a small sob, but she clamped her hand over her mouth. "You are probably in court right now." Grandfather continued, a dry smile touching his lips. "You are probably claiming that I was senile. You are probably claiming that ISIS forced me to sign the will. You are probably claiming that I was confused." He leaned forward toward the camera. "I am not confused. I have never been more clear. I chose ISIS," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Not because she asked, but because she was the only one who didn't ask. For 10 years, I watched you, Lawrence, drain the company accounts to pay for your mistresses and your gambling. I watched you, Patricia, sell the jewelry I gave your mother to fund your country club parties. I watched Tyson grow up into a man who thinks work is something other people do." Tyson shrank in his seat, trying to hide behind his father. "I gave you every chance," grandfather said. "I paid off your debts, I bought your houses, I covered your mistakes, and in return, you left me to die alone. You couldn't even be bothered to visit me unless you needed a signature on a check." The courtroom was deadly silent. The truth was landing like blows from a hammer. "But ISIS," he said, and his face softened. "ISIS was there. She didn't want my money. She wanted my company. She read to me. She listened to me. She is the only Sterling who understands what this family is supposed to mean. She is the only one worthy of the legacy." He paused. He took a deep breath, preparing for the final blow. "I knew you would sue her. I knew your greed would overpower your shame. So I added a clause to my estate plan. A clause that is triggered only by the act of contesting the will." My father looked up. His eyes were wide with panic. He knew about clauses. He knew what was coming. "In the original will," grandfather said, "I left a small safety net, a trust fund of $5 million to be distributed to Lawrence and Patricia solely to ensure you would not end up on the street. I did this out of pity, not love." My parents looked at each other. They didn't know about the $5 million. They had been so focused on the big pot they didn't know there was a safety net. But grandfather continued, his voice turning into cold steel. "By filing this lawsuit, by dragging ISIS into court, by trying to destroy her reputation, you have triggered the in terrorem clause, also known as the no contest clause." He held up a finger. "The penalty for contesting this will is the immediate and total forfeiture of all bequests." Grandfather smiled grimly. "That means, Lawrence, the stamps are gone. Tyson, the penny is gone. And the $5 million safety net? That is gone too. It reverts back to the main estate." He leaned back in his chair. "So congratulations. By trying to take everything you have successfully guaranteed that you get absolutely nothing. You leave this courtroom with zero. No house, no car, no trust fund. You are on your own, sink or swim." He looked at the camera one last time. "ISIS, if you are watching this, keep your head up. You are the CEO now. Run the company like I taught you, and do not give them a dime. They need to learn how to survive in the real world." It is the only gift I have left to give them. Goodbye. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Then came the sound of a body hitting the floor. My father, Lawrence Sterling, had fainted. He slid out of his chair and collapsed onto the hardwood floor in a heap of expensive fabric and broken dreams. My mother didn't check on him. She sat frozen, staring at the black screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She had just realized the magnitude of her mistake. She had walked into this courtroom with a chance at $5 million, and she had talked herself out of every single cent. Tyson was shaking his head, muttering "no, no, no" over and over again. He pulled out his phone, probably checking his bank balance, realizing that the safety net he had always relied on was gone forever. I stood up. I looked at the chaotic scene, the bailiff rushing to my father, the lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, packing his briefcase with frantic speed, trying to escape the disaster before he got sued for malpractice. I looked at the judge. Judge Holloway looked at me. He nodded slowly. A nod of respect. A nod that said, "Game over." "Your Honor." I said, my voice calm amidst the storm. "The defense rests." There was no need for a closing argument. The ghost of Cyrus Sterling had just delivered it for me. My family had come for a war, but they had forgotten the first rule of battle. Never attack someone who holds the keys to your survival. They wanted to be victims. Well, now they were. They were victims of their own greed. I gathered my files. I didn't look back at them. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what their future looked like. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The screen faded to black, but the presence of my grandfather still filled the room. Judge Holloway did not need to deliberate. He did not need to consult with his clerks. He slammed his gavel down with a force that made my mother jump in her seat. The sound echoed like a gunshot, signaling the end of the war. Case dismissed with prejudice, Judge Holloway declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. The will of Cyrus Sterling stands as written. The plaintiffs have triggered the no contest clause and have forfeited all rights to any inheritance. He looked down at my parents with pure disdain. "You came here seeking a fortune," the judge said. "You leave with nothing. Court is adjourned." My mother let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. My father was still on the floor, groggy and disoriented, trying to push himself up on shaking arms. But before he could even stand, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. The sound was thunderous. 6 officers in dark uniforms marched in. They were not court bailiffs. Across their chests in bold yellow letters was the word FBI. The room erupted into chaos. The lead agent walked straight to the plaintiff's table. He looked down at my father, who was barely back on his feet. "Lawrence Sterling," the agent shouted over the noise. "You are under arrest for tax evasion, securities fraud, and interstate racketeering." My father blinked, his eyes unfocused. "What?" "No. That is a mistake. I am a businessman." The agent spun him around and slammed his face against the table. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight was the sweetest music I had ever heard. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited. "Though I suggest you start using it, since your own bank records have already done plenty of talking." My mother screamed, lunging for her husband, but a female officer blocked her path. "Do not touch him, Mom," the officer warned. "Unless you want to join him." But the agents were not done. 2 of them turned and headed toward the gallery, toward the section where Courtney was sitting, frozen in horror. "Courtney Sterling," the second agent announced. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement of charitable funds, and money laundering." Courtney stood up, her face twisting into a mask of ugly entitlement. "Do you know who I am?" she shrieked, backing away. "My father is Senator Hamilton. You cannot arrest me. I am a white woman. I am wealthy." The agent didn't blink. He grabbed her wrist and twisted it behind her back. "We know exactly who you are, Mrs. Sterling," he said, calm and cold. "You are the woman who stole $2 million from children with cancer to play slots in Vegas. Your father can bail you out if he wants to lose his re-election campaign." They dragged her out. She was kicking and screaming, cursing everyone in the room, calling us every slur she could think of. Her designer heels scraped against the floor, leaving black marks that matched the stain on her sole. My father was hauled out the other door, his head hanging low, the fight completely gone from his body. My mother collapsed onto a bench, sobbing into her hands, realizing she was now the wife of a felon and the mother of nothing. And then there was Tyson. My brother stood alone in the middle of the aisle. He looked at the door where his wife had been dragged out. He looked at the door where his father had been taken away. He looked at his mother, who was useless to him now. Then he looked at me. He ran toward me. He stopped at the wooden railing that separated us. His eyes were wide and wet with tears. He looked like a scared little boy. "Isis," he pleaded, reaching his hand out. "Isis, please. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about any of it. Dad lied to me too. Courtney lied to me." I picked up my briefcase. I snapped the locks shut. Click. Click. "I am your brother, Isis," Tyson cried, his voice cracking. "You can't leave me here. They took the car. They took the house. I have nowhere to go. Please, sis, let me come home with you. Just for tonight." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had mocked my cheap shoes an hour ago. The man who had taken a selfie over our dying grandfather. I leaned in close. "You are right, Tyson," I said softly. "You have nowhere to go." I turned my back on him and started walking toward the exit. "But hey," I called out over my shoulder, "at least you still have that lucky penny. Try not to spend it all in one place." The heavy double doors of the courtroom swung open, and I stepped out into the blinding flash of cameras. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air crisp and clean. It was a stark contrast to the morning, when I had arrived in the mud and the gloom. I stood at the top of the marble stairs, the same stairs where Courtney had splashed dirt on my shoes just hours ago. But now I wasn't the defendant, I wasn't the victim, I was the victor. Behind me, the chaotic scene was spilling out of the building. I could hear the shouting. I could hear the unmistakable sound of reporters shouting questions. My mother, Patricia, came stumbling out of the doors. She looked like a ghost. Her designer dress was rumpled. Her mascara was running down her face in long black streaks. She wasn't walking with the grace of a socialite anymore. She was staggering under the weight of her new reality. Tyson was right behind her, looking around frantically, as if he expected a magical rescue helicopter to descend and save him from homelessness. They saw me standing there. They saw the calm in my posture. And for the first time in their lives, they realized that I was the only lifeline they had left. Patricia ran to me. She didn't care about the cameras. She didn't care about the people watching. She threw herself at my feet. She actually fell to her knees on the cold, hard concrete. She grabbed the hem of my pants, the same pants she had sneered at earlier. "Isis," she sobbed. "Isis, please. We are your family. You cannot leave us like this. Your father is going to jail. Courtney is gone. We have nothing. You have millions now. You have the company. Just give us a little bit. Just enough to survive. We raised you. We fed you. Does that mean nothing to you?" Tyson ran down the stairs and stood next to her. He didn't kneel, but he looked broken. "Come on, Isis," he said, his voice trembling. "You made your point. You won. Now stop this. We are Sterlings. We stick together. Mom is on the ground. Help her up. Be the bigger person." I looked down at them. I looked at the woman who had birthed me but never loved me. I looked at the brother who had watched me drown and only offered me an anchor when he realized he was sinking too. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of indifference. It was as if I was looking at strangers. I leaned down slightly. My voice was soft, barely a whisper, but in the silence of the moment it sounded like a thunderclap. "Mother, Do you remember what you said to me this morning right here on these steps? You told me I was the shame of this family. You told me I was a stain that needed to be hidden. My mother looked up, her eyes wide and desperate. I didn't mean it, Isis. I was just stressed. I love you. I shook my head slowly. No, mother, you meant every word. But you were wrong about one thing. I am not the stain, I am the bleach. And I just cleaned this family house from top to bottom, by removing you from it. I straightened up and pulled my leg away from her grasp. She fell forward onto the pavement, weeping into her hands. A sleek silver Bentley pulled up to the curb, purring like a panther. It was the car my grandfather had left specifically for me in a separate garage, a car my family didn't even know existed. Marcus, my driver, stepped out and opened the rear door. He looked at my mother on the ground, then he looked at me. He didn't say a word, he just nodded. I walked down the stairs. I stepped past Tyson, who was standing there with his mouth open, too shocked to even speak. I slid into the back seat. The smell of expensive leather and freedom filled my lungs. I closed the door. The heavy thud shut out the noise of the world. Through the tinted glass, I watched them. I watched my mother screaming at the closed window. I watched Tyson crying. I watched the police lights reflecting in the puddles as the transport van arrived to take my father away. I reached into my purse and pulled out a pair of black sunglasses. I slid them onto my face, shielding my eyes from the glare of the paparazzi. I leaned back against the seat. Marcus caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Where to, Ms. Sterling?" he asked. I smiled. It was a real smile, a smile that reached all the way to my soul. "Take me to the office, Marcus," I said. "We have an empire to run." The car pulled away, leaving the wreckage of the Sterling family behind in the distance. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My future was straight ahead, and for the first time in my life, the view was perfect. This story teaches us that your value is not defined by how your family treats you. Isis spent years being called a failure by people who were actually jealous of her brilliance. She learned that true power is not about being loud or flashy. It is about moving in silence and letting your success make the noise. Sometimes the most toxic people in your life are the ones who share your DNA, and cutting them off is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of survival. You have to be willing to walk alone to get to the place where you truly belong. If you have ever had to build your own table because your family would not give you a seat, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to know that being the black sheep just means you are the only one who isn't following the herd off a cliff. Leave a comment below if you are currently writing your own success story. I want to cheer you on. Thanks for watching, and remember, the best revenge is not revenge at all, it is simply being happy and successful without them.